Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the CJJA CSG webinar series on improving employment outcomes for youth in the juvenile justice system. I'm Wendy Faulkner, Assistant Executive Director of CJJA. This is the first webinar in a six-part series. Today's webinar focuses on the need for CTE and workforce services for youth in the juvenile justice system. I would like to thank all of you for taking time to participate in this webinar today, and special thanks to Jacob Agus Kleiman, Council of State Government, and Brianna McCain, Advanced CTE, who put a great deal of work into the preparation of this webinar and who Stephanie will introduce shortly. For those of you who might be new to CJJA, we are a national nonprofit organization formed in 1994 to improve juvenile justice systems, local secure correctional, residential facilities, services, programs, and most importantly, long-term outcomes for youth and their families. CJJA represents the juvenile justice system CEOs in all 50 states and various local jurisdictions across the country. At this point, I'm going to ask Charity to provide us with a few technical instructions before we start. Charity?
Good afternoon, everyone. If you could please use the audio through your phone and use your PIN number. Everyone will be muted during the broadcast. Type questions at any time. Questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. The webinar is also being recorded. A link to the audio recording and PowerPoint presentation will be sent following the webinar. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Stephanie Vetter.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's my honor to be able to introduce the panelists today. Jacob Agus Kleiman is a policy analyst with the Council of State Governments Justice Center. In his role, he provides technical assistance to states, counties, and nonprofits on a range of juvenile justice and young adult topics to improve outcomes for youth in the juvenile justice system. And prior to joining CSG Justice Center, he worked with Pew's Public Safety Performance Project, supporting the adoption of adult and juvenile sentencing and corrections reforms across the nation. Brianna McCain, in her role as a policy associate, supports advanced CTE state policy and implementation strategy through the development of resources that supports the adoption and implementation of high-quality CTE policies and programs. Brianna also tracks the adoption and implementation of policies and practices that impact CTE, and she maintains the Learning That Works Resource Center, which is a curated web-based collection of best practices, resources, and policies relevant to CTE. And with that, I would like to go ahead and turn it over to our panelists.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name, as said, is Jacob Agus Kleiman. I'm a policy analyst who works with the CSG Justice Center, and I'm excited to be joined by Brianna McCain at Advanced CTE for the webinar today. We're really excited for this webinar and to host this presentation. As mentioned, this is the first in a six-part webinar series where we will have the opportunity to go in depth into the lessons learned from our 50-state survey, as well as our additional work throughout the country. And this is the first webinar in that series, and it really is to table set and really go through the high-level findings and the why we conducted the survey and where things currently stand in the field. For those of you who haven't heard of us or worked with us, the Council of State Governments Justice Center is a national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works across the country with all three branches of government to improve outcomes for those who come into contact with the justice system. We do that in a variety of different ways through technical assistance supporting jurisdictions that receive Second Chance Act or other federal funds, through foundation-supported work, and through independent research. But one of the primary things in the roles that CSG sees itself as a national level organization is to take the advantage of working across the country to both see where best practice is occurring and lift up that best practice, as well as identifying where jurisdictions are seeing similar struggles and barriers and working to identify best strategies to improve and address those barriers. So as part of that work, in 2015, CSG partnered with what was then named CJCA, but is now CJJA, to conduct a 50-state survey on the educational services in juvenile justice facilities. So that survey titled Locked Out really looked at education as a whole. So production of GEDs, K through 12, higher education as well, and had a few questions about workforce development and CTE courses, but it was just 3 questions out of the 30 that was part of that survey. And so while it illuminated many key issues and it was a seminal report, one thing we had identified through those 2 questions on CTE was that this was something that warranted further study. We also saw through our work throughout the country that there was a changing in the demographics of juvenile justice systems. So juvenile justice systems have continued to see the average age increase. As you can see on this slide, in 1997, 62% of youth in facilities were 16 and older. By 2015, that number had increased to 69%. And of the 310,000 youth who were placed on probation, almost half were 16 or older. And we saw that happening to an even greater extent in some of the larger jurisdictions. For example, we were doing some work with LA County and the population in the juvenile camps. LA County was actually 17.9. And what we were seeing throughout our work was that these older youth, these 16, 17, 18-year-olds, some jurisdictions have now raised the age of jurisdiction to be 21, 22, 23, had a different set of needs for services than a traditional juvenile justice population. And they already had their GEDs, they were looking to transition to independence in terms of housing, in terms of the workforce, and the services being provided by juvenile justice systems were not meeting those needs both in facilities and in the community. And what we know is that this was leading to poor outcomes. So approximately 50% of youth on probation and 65% of youth returning from incarceration are rearrested within 1 year. And while the juvenile justice system has made really great strides in terms of getting low-risk youth out of the system, reducing the use of incarceration, what that's resulted in is that the youth who are still coming into contact with juvenile justice systems have higher risk to reoffend, generally have higher needs, and those barriers have made a successful reentry into the community more difficult. Additionally, it's necessary because of the economic gaps and employment program challenges faced by youth who are justice involved. For young adults, just overall, the unemployment rate is significantly higher for this population than it is for the rest of the country. And that's even more true for youth of color. For Black and Hispanic youth, the unemployment rates among this population are even higher. By some estimations, the unemployment rate for a justice-involved young adult population is higher than the unemployment rate was during the Great Depression in the 30s. So it's a really key demographic challenge. It's a difficult group to work with. It's a difficult group to have success with. And what we've seen is that despite some isolated successful programs, employment programs targeted at opportunity youth and justice-involved population specifically have shown a real struggle with long-term job placement and retention and putting this population on the path to success and long-term and gainful employment. It's been a really difficult population to work with, and there hasn't been a lot of examples of best practice. Oh, apologize for skipping the slide there. So in 2019, to address what we were seeing in the field, we wanted to get a better sense of what was happening. And so we once again partnered with CJJA. They changed their name in the middle of the process. That's why I still said CJCA on this slide, to conduct another 50-state survey. Once again, all 50 state juvenile correctional administrators were sent the survey in order. It was then up to those juvenile correctional administrators to decide who in their state was best positioned to answer their questions on the survey, which focused on delivery of CTE, partnerships, reentry, data collection, and reporting. One really important note in terms of when we're going through the data from the survey is that it does reflect when states said that they provided services to all. So the questions were designed in a way where states could respond that they provided services to some, none, or all youth in their facilities. when we reported the numbers, we reported it as when states said that they provided it to all. While it's important for us to identify where there might be a facility doing a really good job or some best practice happening within a state, we feel strongly at CSG, and I think in the field in generally, that justice by geography shouldn't be a thing, that where you happen to be arrested or where you happen to live in a state shouldn't determine the services that you get and the access to supports that you receive. And so we wanted to really reflect what was being made available to all youth. That didn't mean that all youth had to participate, but that it was available service to them when reporting out on the data. And so the survey was really focused on 3 key areas. The first was around what workforce development services were provided to incarcerated youth in facilities and when they returned to the community, and how those services were integrated into case and reentry planning. The second set of questions was focused on who were juvenile justice agencies partnering with. As we know, juvenile justice agencies are not employment specialists, they're not CTE specialists. And so looking at who they were partnering with to provide these services. And then question number 3 was looking at what data was collected and reported on workforce development service provision, employment, and related youth outcomes. So under that first section of what we found was that most incarcerated youth were not provided the workforce development services necessary to obtain viable employment in the community after release. And based off what we had seen around the country, this wasn't necessarily a shocking outcome, but it was disappointing. So in the development of the survey and looking over the responses, we worked with a number of leaders in the field, such as Advanced CTE, as well as other workforce development agencies, ones working with youth, such as ROCA, Youth Build, Strive, working with the Department of Education, Department of Justice, as well as state leaders, to identify what really made for key CTE and workforce development services. And what we identify was a bucket of sort of 4 core components that should be provided in order to best improve outcomes for youth. And you can see these 4 components here. It's employability skills training, including resume building, interviewing, sort of the soft skill development, on-site and online CTE programs, work-based hands-on learning, and then importantly, industry recognized credentials. So making sure that credential is being worked on or recognized by the industries and not just provided from facilities or from state systems. And what we found was that across the board, states weren't necessarily illustrating any one of these. The highest was 27 states reported that they did some sort of soft skills development training for all youth, but very few states were offering the full complement of services. So only 8 states were offering all 4 of these core component services to youth. So while a youth in the facility may be able to work towards industry recognized credential, they weren't also having access to soft skill development or to work-based hands-on learning. And so it was really difficult for you to get skills in all of the identified areas. We also wanted to look at what was driving the decision-making around what services to provide. And so what we found was that it was primarily staff availability was driving what services were being provided to youth. You'll see later on in the presentation that some of this is connected to a lack of partnerships with key workforce partners or education partners. Some of it we heard from states was challenges around union contracts where only correctional officers were allowed to provide services in facilities. Some of it was just availability of resources in the community. But what it came down to was that states generally were not reporting that outcomes, employment numbers, youth interests were really what was driving it. It was primarily what staff would be interested in or were knowledgeable to teach. And that was what was being made available in terms of services, and not necessarily making sure that those were the services that were providing the best outcomes. So the second core bucket that we looked at was around the partnerships and how juvenile justice agencies were partnering with workforce development services and education providers in order to improve and provide services. And what we found was that most state juvenile correctional agencies lacked the key partnerships needed to help incarcerated youth overcome barriers to obtaining viable employment in the community. So when we looked at what formal partnerships existed, and we really wanted to make sure in the survey that we identified this as formal partnerships, because while oftentimes you would hear about best practice where one facility had a really strong partnership with an employer, or one probation officer had done a really good job of building up local employers, that sort of work, while fantastic and can be learned from, isn't sustainable. We know that there's high turnover in this field, there's high burnout, and as a result, if it's really based off those individual relationships driving these partnerships, when people move on at either of those organizations, those relationships can fall apart. So it's really critical to form those formal relationships in order to build sustainable change. And what we found was, while there was better relationships on the traditional education side with community colleges, it dropped down when looking at things such as technical or trade schools or state education agencies, with only 25 states reporting that they have formal relationships with technical or trade schools. And then on the workforce development side, what we saw was that there was not a lot of connection with the non-traditional workforce partners. So not a lot of formal partnerships with employers to help drive pathways to employment, and even less with state or local WIOA boards or local chambers of commerce or business roundtables that could be helping in identifying what are those key services that employers need, what are the supports and training that employers are looking for, both in order to work with this population, as well as in terms of skills for the job. And similar to what we saw with the services being provided, what we saw is that while states may have a number of partnerships and formal partnerships, they generally didn't have a robust set of those formal partnerships. So while 39 states did report having partnerships with community colleges, only 30 of those states reported that they actually had partnerships with both community college and community-based organizations, and only 20 of those states identified having all three, including partnerships with employers. And so once again, it really became clear that states were struggling to provide a full range of services and options to the youth in their juvenile justice systems. That it may have been possible for a youth to pursue a community college degree, or it may have been possible for a youth to get connected with an employer. It was rare that it was possible for a youth to connect with a community college degree or an employer, or both concurrently, while under juvenile justice supervision through support of those partnerships. And we see that lack of partnerships and that formal discussions happening in terms of how resources are being utilized to support these services. So we asked about what sort of federal funding sources states were utilizing in order to support CTE and workforce development services. And what we found was that only 26 states said that they utilized federal Perkins funding to support these services, and critically, only 11 states identified utilizing WIOA funds to support services for this population. Under both Perkins and WIOA, justice-involved youth fall under opportunity youth and as a key focus area and focus group of these services to get plans under Perkins 5. I believe up to 2% of state Perkins plans funds can go to this population of a justice-involved. WIOA also identifies it as a target population. And the reality is that the reason that these funds aren't being utilized is because justice agencies aren't at the table. They're not part of these conversations about the Perkins plan. So Perkins 5 planning is happening right now. They're not at WIOA boards. They're not advocating for this population. They're not connected to these services. And we found that only 2 states reported that they were utilizing all of Perkins, WIOA, and some other federal grant fund source to help fund these services. And what that means is that, while obviously resources are difficult, and these can be difficult things to fund, the resources are there and they're not being utilized effectively to help improve and provide these services. I also want to note, while there was not a slide on it, in terms of the partnerships and connecting with, local chambers of commerce or WIOA boards, what we found was that less than half of states were sending any sort of representative to these boards to be a part of these meetings. And so beyond just not being aware of and utilizing these resources, what we saw is that there was no one to advocate for this population. So while juvenile justice youth are a part of the opportunity youth larger group, they do represent a small percentage of opportunity youth. And as such, in many plans driven towards that population, the specific and unique needs of a juvenile justice population are not considered or the focus area. And what the research has really shown is that justice-involved youth has different and distinct needs than just an opportunity youth in general. When we worked with Youth Build and with Strive on their programs, that was one of our big key takeaways from those programs, was that they did a really great job of serving an opportunity youth population, but that they weren't properly addressing the specific needs of working with the justice-involved population, such as making sure that there's joint case planning happening with probation, an understanding of collateral consequences, discussions around expungement and case sealing. And because those conversations weren't happening, they were seeing worse outcomes for that population. And being a part of those conversations and reaching out to those non-traditional partners and being an advocate for that population is really one of the roles of juvenile justice system, to make sure that they are receiving the services that they need. And then moving on to the third bucket of services that we identified was that most states do not track key employment outcomes for incarcerated youth while they are in facilities or after their release. This isn't something that was surprising to us after talking to states, and we recognized it was both not a focus area of juvenile justice systems historically, nor was it something that is easy to track. So we definitely don't want to hold these numbers against states or say that they're doing a poor job, but we wanted to highlight the extent to which this data wasn't being tracked, because it will need to be in order to improve outcomes. So what we found was states were not collecting key workforce development outcome data for youth that were in their facilities. So only 37 states collected data on whether industry recognized credentials were earned. Only 17 states collected post-secondary degree or diploma earned. 14 states on job training diplomas earned, and only 8 states collected data on all 3 pieces. And beyond just looking at outcome measures, part of why this is important was we found that in terms of who is in charge of workforce and CTE planning, it was just reentry case plan managers that had a number of other jobs and duties within a system. Because of that, unless the youth was advocating for themselves, if it wasn't being tracked formally, a reentry case plan manager may have no idea that a youth actually was working towards an industry recognized credential and maybe had received 50% of the credits. And because of that, wouldn't build that into the case plan or make sure that link was being made. And so it was really putting onus on the youth to advocate for themselves about what they had accomplished within facilities. Beyond that, it makes tracking on how those services are leading to outcomes in the community even more difficult if you cannot look back and track about what was being provided in the facility. Recognizing the difficulties of this, states were also generally not collecting key youth outcomes for post-release or for youth in the community. Only 17 states reported tracking whether there was youth obtaining employment. Only 14 were tracking whether that employment was maintained for a period of longer than 6 months. Only 8 were looking at whether a training or certificate or credential that was begun in the facility was completed in the community. And once again, recognize that these are difficult numbers to track, that they're not a traditional focus area of juvenile justice systems, but they're really key in answering whether programs are being successful. If you have a limitation because of your facility space where youth can't get hands-on training with materials, and so they can't finish an industry recognized credential, then it becomes incredibly important that youth are finishing that credential upon reentry into the community and getting that hands-on workforce. And if there's not that ability to track to make sure that's being completed, then that time spent in the facility, while not necessarily wasted, isn't leading to improved outcomes either. And so, this is something that systems can leverage partnerships, if they partner with community colleges, with workforce development services. If they're tracking those outcomes, they can partner to share that data, or they can track themselves. But in order to really improve outcomes and improve services, it's crucial to be able to answer what is or is not working, what is being successful, and to be able to answer those questions. So before I turn this over to Brianna, we hope to have a really robust conversation both over this webinar as well as over the ensuing webinars as we get into more details in each of these focus areas and the lessons learned and the key strategies that we saw about what barriers you all are seeing in your jurisdiction, what are the best practices that are happening, and how we can really have a conversation about how to improve outcomes for this population. So over to you, Brianna, to talk a little bit about what Advanced CTE has seen work for this field in general.
Great, thank you, Jacob. As it was mentioned earlier, my name is Brianna McCain. I'm a policy associate at Advanced CTE. Doesn't look like the slides are advancing. Okay, great. So if you're not familiar with Advanced CTE, Advanced CTE is a nonprofit that was established in 1920 to represent the state and territory heads of secondary, post-secondary, and adult career technical education, also known as CTE, across the nation. And as an organization, we support an innovative and high-quality CTE system through leadership, advocacy, and partnerships. Does not seem to be working for me. Okay, there we go. So in terms of what exactly career technical education is, CTE is an educational option that provides learners with the knowledge and skills they need to be prepared for college and careers. It emphasizes real-world skills development within a selected career focus, also known as a career cluster. CTE allows learners to apply what they learn through hands-on projects and engage with industry mentors. And specifically, learners take specialized courses in addition to required core academic classes. So when I mention CTE, I'm referring specifically to high-quality CTE. As an organization, Advanced CTE believes that there are some non-negotiable elements of what we consider to be a high-quality CTE program. Specifically, high-quality CTE programs consist of rigorous course standards and progressive sequence courses. So this means that all CTE programs of study should be developed using rigorous state-approved and industry-aligned standards and be organized into deliberate course sequences. They should also be thoroughly aligned with state-approved academic standards and should offer multiple courses within each CTE program. And the CTE program must start with an introductory course that teaches broad foundational knowledge and skills and then progresses to more occupationally specific courses. Additionally, all CTE programs of study should culminate in a credential of value, ideally one that is state-approved and industry validated. The second element of a high-quality CTE program is secondary and post-secondary alignment. Going back to Jacob's point about partnerships, it's very important to have secondary and post-secondary partnerships to ensure that CTE programs are of high quality. So CTE programs should regularly be reviewed by secondary and post-secondary representatives. In addition, all CTE programs should have both a secondary and post-secondary component, whether it be a 2- or 4-year institution or beyond, with a seamless transition between the two. And transition should be facilitated through credit transfer and statewide articulation agreements. And secondary learners should have access to dual enrollment or early college opportunities while progressing through their CTE program. We also believe that it's incredibly important to have industry involvement in high quality CTE programs. Specifically, industry partners should be involved in validating standards and credentials, informing course development, and helping provide work-based learning experiences for learners. In addition, there should be sustainable, consistent processes for engaging industry partners to ensure the relevance and rigor of CTE programs and related learner experiences at the secondary and post-secondary levels. In addition, we believe that CTE programs should be informed by labor market demand. Specifically, all CTE programs should be able to justify their existence by demonstrating that labor market information shows a consistent and sustainable demand in high skill and in-demand occupations for employees in related fields in the state and or local region. And labor and economic data should include accurate information on the current and projected number of openings in specific career fields, as well as data on salary and any technological or policy advancements that may affect the career field. Obviously, it's very important to have high quality instructions. All CTE programs must have in place instructors who are appropriately certified, both in teaching and industry knowledge. And we think it's really important that students have access to experiential learning. So institutions and employers should work collaboratively to provide all learners with access to relevant work-based learning opportunities, including virtual or simulated opportunities for those who may not have access to in-person experiences. And all learners should have access to experiential learning. So one of the things that Advanced CTE has been pushing our members to do is to advance equity in CTE. What you see on the screen is Advanced CTE's statement on equity in career technical education. But basically, we believe that state leaders have a responsibility to identify and dismantle historical barriers and construct systems that support each learner in accessing, feeling welcome in, fully participating in, and successfully completing a high-quality CTE program of study. To help state leaders advance equity, Advanced CTE released a series of briefs called Making Good on the Promise that provides promising practices to close equity gaps. While these briefs were specifically tailored to meet the needs of state CTE directors, we do think that some of the lessons learned that came from these briefs are still relevant. So core to advancing equity in CTE is understanding the history of CTE and where CTE is today. So historically, CTE, once called vocational education, was used to track students, sending a disproportionate number of low-income learners, female learners, learners with disabilities, and learners of color into terminal programs, leading to jobs with uncertain promise of economic growth and prosperity. However, as the quality of CTE programs has vastly improved, the nature of the equity challenge in CTE has transformed. While states have worked hard and continue to work to improve the quality of CTE, many learners do not have access to these high-quality opportunities. In addition to acknowledging the history of CTE, it's also important to leverage data to identify where equity gaps exist and conduct root cause analysis to learn why the gaps exist and build a strategy for closing those gaps. Because of the history of CTE, it's also important to build trust with historically marginalized communities that CTE failed to serve in the past. Core to doing this is ensuring that CTE programs fulfill the promise of CTE, meaning that they lead to high skill, high wage, and in-demand careers. It's also important to ensure that learners have access to high quality CTE programs and that any barriers that prevent students from accessing programs are removed. However, we know that only providing access will not close equity gaps. It's also important to ensure that students are provided wraparound supports and an environment in which they feel welcome in and can succeed in high quality CTE programs. Advancing equity in CTE is top of mind for state CTE leaders with the reauthorization of the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act, also known as Perkins 5. Perkins was reauthorized in 2018. So Perkins authorizes the federal investment in CTE across the country. It is authorized at $1.2 billion, which sounds like a lot, but compared to other federal policy is not that much money. As an education program, Perkins provides funding for secondary, post-secondary, and adult CTE programs in every state and U.S. territory, as well as the District of Columbia. It's important to note that Perkins is not an individual benefit program, but rather it supports CTE programs. The law is dedicated to the continuous improvement of CTE and expanding learner access to high-quality CTE programs of study. So Perkins is administered by a state-designated eligible agency. These eligible agencies are currently in the process of developing their state plans, which they must submit to the U.S. Department of Education in April for approval in order to receive their Perkins funds. Fortunately, Perkins provides states with an opportunity to think through how they can improve CTE programs in the juvenile justice facilities. Throughout Perkins 5, you will see reference to out-of-school youth and at-risk youth, which is inclusive of juvenile justice-involved youth. In fact, under Perkins 5, the eligible agency is required to consult a variety of entities during the state plan development process, including representatives of agencies serving out-of-school and at-risk youth. So in theory, state leaders should consult with entities that support juvenile justice-involved youth to think through how they can leverage the new law to improve CTE programs in the juvenile justice system. Under Perkins 5, there are many funding levers that state leaders can use to support the access and quality of CTE programs. However, state leaders can leverage the state leadership funds to advance high-quality CTE programs in juvenile justice facilities specifically. So under this new Perkins law, the allowable state set-aside to serve individuals in state institutions increased from 1% to 2%. And Perkins 5 specifically added juvenile justice facilities to the types of institutions where these funds can be used. However, for full transparency, many states are still trying to figure out the best way to ensure high-quality CTE programs in juvenile justice facilities and are, in general, just very interested in learning more about how to ensure CTE programs support learners in these facilities. So in Perkins 5 plans that I have reviewed, some ways that states intend to ensure high-quality CTE programs in juvenile justice facilities include through competitive grants and innovative programs that help learners develop marketable skills and test for multiple national recognized certifications. However, there are some states that are leading in this work. So states such as Oklahoma have already done significant work to ensure juvenile justice-involved youth have the opportunity to develop employability skills. The Career Tech Skills Center, also known as CTSC school system in Oklahoma, is a multi-campus entity operated by the Oklahoma Department of Career and Technology Education that provides career technical education training to adult offenders under the supervision of the Oklahoma Department of Corrections and juvenile offenders under the supervision of the Oklahoma Office of Juvenile Affairs. CTSC equips adults and youth with employability and technical skills necessary to succeed in the workforce. Learners in the CTSC school system can obtain industry-recognized credentials and career readiness credentials that document that learners have obtained the work readiness skills sought by employers. Additionally, to help ensure that each juvenile justice-involved youth has access to CTE opportunities and the supports they need to succeed post-release, the CTSC employs a student transit services team, which consists of instructors, employment coordinators, and transition coordinators. Collectively, the student services team helps to ensure that learners receive career guidance, develop key skills such as interviewing skills to help with job placement, and are able to secure critical resources such as housing to help with transition. In addition to the state level, at the federal level, there has also been support for ensuring that juvenile justice-involved youth have access to high-quality CTE programs. Juvenile Justice Reentry Education Program, Opening Doors to Colleges and Careers through Career and Technical Education Program, that's a very long name, was launched by the Department of Education in 2016. The programs that are funded through that program focus on building strong partnerships to improve education and employment outcomes for justice-involved youth. The programs supported by the grant allow learners to obtain industry-recognized credentials through CTE programs and provide individualized transition supports for learners. So you'll see that a theme is that it's really important that students are able to obtain industry-recognized credentials in these programs and that they're provided support while in the program and upon release. I believe we're saving the questions for the end. However, I encourage you to learn who your state CTE director is if you don't already know by going to the link on this page, particularly as states begin to wrap up their 4-year Perkins 5 plans. They have to submit these plans in April. And like I said earlier, I think states want to do well in this area and they want to advance high quality CTE programs in juvenile justice facilities, but might need some help along the way. Great, so I'll hand it back over to Jacob.
Thanks, Brianna. I do want to, before we get started on thinking through some discussion questions and getting to your question, is making sure that nobody has any questions about any of the material that we produced today or talked about today. The why we did the survey, some of the methodology, the questions that were asked, or any of the information I provided. If there was any clarifying questions or anything that anybody had, I think there's a chat box that you can utilize to ask any of those questions. So I don't know if Stephanie or Charity, if people have posted any questions there yet, just asking about clarifications or about the material that was posted.
Sure, yes. Hi, this is Stephanie. We had a question, I think it was for Brianna, about the Learning What Works Resource Center, your web-based collection of best practices. Is there a way people can access that, and where would they do that?
Yeah, it's a public resource. You just have to go to careertech.org, and then on our homepage, there's a button that says Resource Center, and if you click that, it'll take you directly there.
Thank you. That was our only question right now, Jacob.
Great. So I think, yeah, in terms of just to spur a little bit, I think, of what we're hoping to talk about and think through both today and throughout these webinars, that I don't know how to go back necessarily aside, but the first real discussion question we are looking at was just whether what we talked about today matches the key challenges and barriers that you all are seeing in your jurisdiction in order to improve employment or CTE education for youth in your system. So whether what we saw in the survey and through conversations matches what you're seeing in your jurisdiction, or if there are additional barriers that you all have identified and see every day in your work that might be driving some of these difficulties and challenges in meeting the needs of this population. To give people a chance to type, happy to run through some of what we saw from our conversations, was that this was something that was new. So as talked about, as the average age of youth in juvenile justice systems has continued to rise, the needs of that population have shifted in terms of services, in terms of what they're looking for, in terms of their interests, and systems are still adapting to those. So building up those services and working around, the struggles of getting certain things into facilities, going around challenges with technology. Technology was something we heard a lot of, that there's not access to internet, closed loop systems, everything has to be vetted. And systems are really trying to work through what exactly they can do in order to improve and meet these changing needs, and are really hungry and looking for that best practice around how to overcome some of these barriers. So I don't know if that's something that you all are seeing, dealing with those same technology issues or provider issues, if there are partner issues of how to identify who those key partners are that haven't been worked with in the past, and thinking through how those partners can be engaged to really improve systems. So I don't know if anyone has an example of something that they've done in their jurisdiction, or if it's something that you're interested in learning more about, or to talk through, or if there's any questions that people have just around the challenges and barriers that are being faced.
Yes, there's another question, Jacob. I guess it must be to the group. Does anyone utilize tablets to enhance and or supplement CTE in juvenile justice facilities? So that was a question posed to the entire audience.
Yeah, I can quickly say, and Brianna may actually have more to offer in terms of the use of tablets and technology and CTE services and how that's being improved. That there are some states who are working on how to do that. I think Ohio is a state that we talked to that's utilizing tablets. and to help improve services. And a few other jurisdictions as well as a couple individual facilities. I think Oregon is as well. And there's, a lot of technology. They've worked with those technology providers in order to put in the security necessary to have those in the facility. Some jurisdictions have given the tablets to the youth, and some only are able to use them while they're in the classrooms. But one of the exciting things about this field right now is the level of interest from employer and technology company partners. So Google's heavily invested, organizations such as Slack and other technology companies are interested about how they can utilize their technology to reach communities that they have struggled to reach and to get involved in into these fields. And they've identified justice-involved populations as one of those key groups that they want to look. And so they're looking for partners, whether those are justice systems or nonprofit providers, to really partner with on how to improve and reach these populations. And there's a lot of grants and money out there for things such as using tablets. I don't know if Brianna, if you have anything to add about how tablets are being utilized to improve CTE services.
Yeah, I'm not sure specifically about tablets, but in general, I know that technology is being used to provide learners with experiential learning opportunities. I imagine that that's the case in juvenile justice facilities, considering that juvenile and justice involved youth may not be able to leave the facility. So it is something that I would personally be interested in learning more about, and that Advanced CTE will be monitoring.
Thank you. Here's another question. One of our participants writes, working to establish a memorandum of agreement with local workforce development boards. The challenge is dedicated staffing resources. How would you address some of that? Or how have you seen other places address that?
That's definitely something that we saw in the survey. One of the questions we asked, there wasn't a slide on it in this presentation, was around who was responsible for workforce development in CTE. And what we found was that there generally wasn't someone who was responsible, that it was just probation or parole officers or reentry case managers or the heads of facilities who are responsible for building those own partnerships and tracking and monitoring. What we think is that that's something that needs to be addressed through identifying and establishing a formal point of contact, someone whose job really is to focus on this. And so really depending on the size of your jurisdiction, I think there are different models that can be used. Oregon, for example, has 2 statewide workforce development CTE directors who each cover half of the state. They work in coordination with each other out of the same office. And so they are responsible for helping facilities establish those MOUs, track data, identify those partners. And so they use that sort of centralized model of there's 2 staff people associated who are in charge of those education areas, who help facilities that are looking to build those partnerships. They help create partnerships at the state level that can be used to then support local levels. So, if you're working from a state to state level, agency-wide, they're able to handle that effectively. But we've also seen in some larger jurisdictions, there's a facility based in Atlanta or just outside of Atlanta. And just because of the higher age that they were seeing, they hired and identified and have a staff member who is responsible. And if that staff member has built up a really strong connection with some local community colleges and trade schools and taken that on. And so, for those larger jurisdictions, to have even just one person within a facility can make sense. But also from the statewide resource level, it's just sometimes about prioritization and recognizing that if this is something we want to do effectively, it means having someone whose job it is, and then utilizing that person to their full potential. So having them attend the WIOA board meetings, having them present to chambers of commerce, go to national level trainings. There's conferences at places like CEA, which is the Correctional Educational Administrators Conference. where these things are discussed and strategies are developed, and reaching out to find template MOUs and MOUs that have been used by jurisdictions or other places as starting points. Those resources are there, and it's just about prioritizing and identifying that staff. And there are some models, and I'm happy to share with you more about what that looks like, where states have identified those staff members and made that something that they're focusing on.
Thank you, Jacob. Another question, someone's wondering if you could name some of the nationally recognized certificates that juvenile justice facilities should be offering?
Brianna, I don't know if you want to start there in terms of what some of the best places to identify what those are.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of states actually have a list of like state recognized credentials that have been validated by employers, and we would certainly encourage juvenile justice facilities to offer those certificates. So I would just try to use Google to see if you can find your state's list. And if you don't, I would try to look at other states' lists, because our stance is that whatever credentials that are provided to juvenile justice involved youth should be industry validated, and ideally also state validated.
Yeah, and in terms of what that can look like in terms of making sure that those lists, I know one of the best practices that we saw that we highlighted in the brief was around Florida. And what they actually did was they have their workforce development board, or I forget the exact entity, but it's a group of employers who works with their system directly to create a list and check that list every year of what resources are being provided and make sure that it's something that that employer community is looking for. So they have that ongoing meeting. They meet every year to review what's being provided, and they only fund those services that have been identified by the employer community as being of value and something that leads to employment. And it's just another case of how those partnerships are really key in having those conversations, because there are obviously national level certificates around OSHA, things of that nature that can be worked on. But if there's not a local employer need for those services, it doesn't necessarily help your population. So one thing we saw was there was a jurisdiction that we saw a facility had identified a welding program that they thought was a really great program. They purchased all the equipment, but the equipment didn't necessarily come with a recognized credential. And so even though the youth in that facility were going through the welding program, it wasn't leading to any sort of employment opportunities or internships or connections to employers. And what it really wound up turning into was just a very expensive video game. And so really it's important to talk and look and make sure that it's the local market, and that the local market is what's going to support. So while there are some of those national level certificates, around food safety training and things of that nature, there can definitely be the need to have those conversations with local areas. I would also say another place to look at for some national is around soft skill development and technology. So I know Google has actually partnered, I believe it's with Southern New Hampshire University, but I forget the exact entity, but to provide online courses around soft skill development that are being tested and validated and approved and can be credentialed, things like Microsoft. Some of those technology credentials are generally pretty applicable across a range of systems, and so there are those opportunities as well to think through how those might be useful.
Thank you. Earlier, you mentioned, Jacob, a few, it sounded like national partners that are recognizable as workforce development agencies that serve youth. I think you mentioned ROCA, Youth Build, and Stride. Is there
Stride?
Okay. Could you just give us a high-level overview of those examples? what they do?
Of course. So ROCA is not actually national level. It's actually currently just in Massachusetts and actually just launched in Baltimore this past year. I mentioned it because it's one of the gold standards of working with a justice-involved population. Their outcomes are truly incredible. They work with only the highest risk youth. So if someone hasn't committed multiple offenses, is in high risk, hasn't been out of the system already, they'll actually turn them away. They really only work with that highest level youth. They have a really intensive model, and they have reduced, recidivism rates among the highest group by 70, 80%. And they have incredible data tracking, and they have partnerships with employers, and they're sort of just the gold model. They're the ones who they partnered with the state of Massachusetts and Goldman Sachs to do one of the innovative investment funds where Goldman Sachs sort of upfront pays for the program for 5 years. There's a complicated calculation, and that for recidivism gains seen from the program, the state of Massachusetts pays some percentage of the gains from that saving of money from people not being taken out of home or being out of the system entirely, and pays that back to Goldman Sachs for that loan. So it's a social investment fund. I would encourage you to look at their website about some of the practices that they have, about some of their outcomes, but they're unfortunately only available in those 2 locations. So other than learning from them, you can't really access what their services are unless you happen to be in Massachusetts or now in Baltimore. But the national level organizations, Youth Build, Strive, there's also Job Corps, Center for Employment Opportunities, a number of these organizations that have historically worked around workforce development and are willing to or have targeted a justice-involved population as one of their key focus areas and focus groups within their services. They don't necessarily traditionally focus on a justice-involved population, but have and will serve that population. And they, both Strive and Youth Build, partnered with CSG over the last year to do assessments of their systems and find how they could work with the justice-involved population more effectively. But all of these organizations recognize that this is something that they need to do better around. And so they're looking for ways to improve how they meet the needs of these youth. And one of the key things that we found was that there weren't those formal partnerships. And so one of the things we suggested to them through that assessment was about creating more formal partnerships and more targeted MOUs with justice agencies. So if you're representing a justice agency, I think Youth Build is in all 50 states. I think Strive is in the majority of states. Reach out to the national level organizations, see if there are affiliates in your area, and if you can reach out to them, what sort of connections you can make, because we know that they are trying to improve their connections. We know that they're looking to better serve this population, and so they're looking for those people and jurisdictions and facilities to reach out to them about establishing how these resources. So happy to provide a list of some of those organizations, but once again, Youth Build, Strive, Job Corps, Center for Employment Opportunities are just a few off the top of my head that work in multiple states and in multiple jurisdictions. I don't know if Brianna, you have any other examples?
No, those are the ones that come to mind to me too.
Thank you. I think we have just a couple more questions. In Connecticut, they're working to create partnerships and find employment opportunities for probation clients, but some employers are reluctant to work with court-involved youth due to liability concerns. Do you have any suggestions on how to gain buy-in?
Yeah, this is something that has been difficult, because this is a difficult population to work with. There is that need to gain buy-in and to build support. And one bad experience can obviously turn an employer off. So all it takes is one youth to have a really bad experience for someone to not want to work with it again. And this is why I'd say system support is really important. So making sure that your employer partners are understanding what it means to work with a justice-involved youth, so that it's possible that they may have to miss work because of a court date, that to not hold that against them, and to make sure that you're an advocate for that youth that's under your supervision, and not just a liaison. But it's also about that there's that support that they have from you as a probation officer, and from the department as a whole, where if something's going wrong, that they can call you and you can help mediate it. And what's really important is I think to connect with employers that have had really good experiences. So there's some employers who have gone through these partnerships and report working with this just involved population as some of their best employees, and that work, and finding those examples of employers who have had those positive experiences and sharing those stories. And that's something that we at CSG can help connect and share those stories as well, from what we've seen and from where we've seen those stories of success, and just combining those stories of success and positive outcomes with clear messaging about the level of support that you will be providing, that they'll have, that it's not just this youth who's just as involved as coming, but it's all the support and services and resources that comes with being involved in the system. So rather than looking at system involvement as a negative, actually look at it as a positive in terms of support and services being provided and available options to the employer to mediate issues, of having an additional voice that can support with that, and try to really raise up that you and your system are there to help the youth, that your support both to them and to the employer, and that being justice involved is actually a way that can strengthen their ability to learn and grow, as opposed to impede.
Thank you. I think that that brings us to the end of our questions, unless I see any coming in the next few minutes. I think Jacob and Brianna, you really did a great job in highlighting the need for CTE and workforce development services for youth in the juvenile justice system, which is what today's webinar was focused on. We want to remind folks that this is one in a series of webinars, and in the next webinar, I think we'll be exploring a little bit deeper about partnerships with key educational entities and the workforce development providers. So we may get down into some more detail then. Any, go ahead, Jacob. Any last words? Closing?
Yeah, I think the one thing is, as you can see on this last slide, I think Brianna's heard this pitch from me before, of coming out of the survey and this work. We're in the process of really trying to move this work forward. So if you are doing work around workforce development and CTE in your systems and are looking for support, are looking to connect with national partners, as you mentioned, both Youth Build and Strive have worked with us over the past year and are looking to get more engaged. We've had some conversations with funders as well, that we're really looking to find some jurisdictions right now who are looking to partner and pilot some new strategies to implement some of the key lessons learned. And so if that's something that your jurisdiction is interested in learning more about, so please reach out. We're having those preliminary conversations, and really want to find some opportunities to work with groups like Advanced CTE, with Youth Build, with Strive, with funders, and within a jurisdiction to really begin building up that evidence base of best practices, and are looking for the right opportunities to do that. So if that's something you're interested in learning more about, so please reach out and continue to attend these webinars and have those conversations with us.
Thank you. There was one more question before we close this out. It's specific to the Perkins and the WIOA funds. Are there any federal mandates that you know of that are attached to the Perkins and WIOA funds that require states to allocate a portion of the funds to juvenile justice clients only?
Not that I'm aware of. Under Perkins, states have to give 2% of leadership funds to state institutions, and one of those institutions can be juvenile justice facilities. But as far as I know, there's no mandate that says that it only has to go to juvenile justice facilities.
Yeah, I would say similar answer, that I'm not aware of a mandate requiring it, only that it is an identified priority population, and up to the 2% set aside. Under WIOA, it's a priority population that should be getting targeted, but there's no specific mandate around juvenile justice. And under WIOA, I think it falls under opportunity youth more broadly. Services that support homeless youth would meet that requirement, but as would services for juvenile justice youth, but it's not a mandate specifically about juvenile justice youth.
Thank you. And then the last question had to do with dates for the next webinar series. CJJA is working with CSG and others to finalize dates, and we will be sending those out in the next few weeks. Well, I think Wendy might want to close us out if she's available.
Thank you, everyone. Just a quick thank you again to Jacob and Brianna for their time today. We look forward to hearing more from you over the coming months. Thank you all for attending. Have a great day. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.